Before the moon became a symbol of wonder, it was a battlefield, not of soldiers, but of rockets, fear, and global pride. In the middle of the Cold War, whoever ruled space could rule Earth. This wasn't exploration, it was a race for survival. It wasn't just a journey of scientific curiosity, it was the ultimate showdown between two superpowers, a high-stakes competition that defined an era. This is the story of the space race, the epic contest between the United States and the Soviet Union. Our story begins in the aftermath of World War II. The world was divided by the Cold War, a tense standoff between two opposing ideologies: capitalism, led by the United States, and communism, led by the Soviet Union. This rivalry wasn't fought with traditional armies on a battlefield, but in arenas of technology, propaganda, and influence. And the grandest arena of all was space. The starting pistol for the space race fired on October 4, 1957. The world awoke to a new sound from the heavens, a faint electronic beep. The Soviet Union had done the unthinkable. They had launched Sputnik 1, the first ever artificial satellite into orbit. This tiny 184-pound metal sphere was a monumental achievement. It circled the globe, its radio signal a constant reminder that the Soviets had conquered the final frontier first. For the United States, Sputnik was a wake-up call, a technological Pearl Harbor. Panic and fear gripped the nation. If the Soviets could put a satellite in space, what else could they do? Could they launch nuclear missiles from orbit? The pressure was immense. The American government responded swiftly, creating NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958 with a clear mission: to win the race to space. But the Soviets kept racking up victories. Just a month after Sputnik 1, they launched Sputnik 2, carrying the first living being into orbit, a dog named Laika. Though her mission ended tragically, it proved that life could be sustained in the harsh environment of space. Then, in April 1961, came the ultimate triumph. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to journey into outer space. His 108-minute flight around the Earth was a global sensation. Gagarin became an international hero, a symbol of Soviet superiority. The Americans were falling further and further behind. The pressure on the United States was at an all-time high. President John F. Kennedy knew he needed a goal so bold, so audacious, that it would galvanize the nation and leapfrog the Soviets. On May 25, 1961, just a month after Gagarin's flight, Kennedy stood before Congress and delivered one of the most famous speeches in history. He declared that America should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. The Moonshot, as it became known, was an almost unimaginable challenge. At the time, the U.S. had only managed a 15-minute suborbital flight by astronaut Alan Shepard. They had no rocket powerful enough to reach the moon, no lunar lander, no experience with long-duration spaceflight. It was like vowing to build a skyscraper when you've only built a shed. But the goal was set. The race for the moon was on. NASA's early efforts were focused on the Mercury program, which sent the first Americans into space. While Shepard and Gus Grissom made suborbital flights, it was John Glenn who finally matched Gagarin's feat in February 1962, becoming the first American to orbit the Earth. The Mercury program was a crucial learning experience, teaching NASA about the fundamentals of human spaceflight. Next came the Gemini program. This was the vital intermediate step, designed to master the complex techniques needed for a lunar mission. Gemini was all about practice. Astronauts learned how to perform spacewalks, also known as extravehicular activities, or EVAs. They practiced rendezvous and docking maneuvers, where two spacecraft would meet and connect in orbit, a critical skill for the future Apollo missions. Gemini crews spent days, even weeks in space, testing human endurance and the reliability of their equipment. Gemini was the unsung hero of the space race, laying all the groundwork for the final push to the moon. Meanwhile, the Soviets were not standing still.
They had their own lunar program, shrouded in secrecy. They achieved the first spacewalk with Alexei Leonov and sent unmanned probes to crash land on the moon. Their chief designer, the brilliant but mysterious Sergei Korolev, was the mastermind behind their early successes. However, his sudden death in 1966 was a devastating blow to the Soviet program, creating a leadership vacuum they struggled to overcome. Tragedy also struck the American program. On January 27, 1967, during a routine launch rehearsal, a fire broke out in the Apollo 1 command module. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee perished in the blaze. The nation was in shock. The Apollo program was grounded, and a rigorous investigation led to major redesigns of the spacecraft, making it safer and more reliable. It was a painful but necessary lesson, learned at the highest possible cost. After the tragedy, a renewed and determined NASA pushed forward. The centerpiece of the Apollo program was the mighty Saturn V rocket. Standing taller than a 36-story building, it remains the most powerful rocket ever built. It was a masterpiece of engineering, the key that would unlock the path to the moon. The Apollo missions tested each component piece by piece. Apollo 7 tested the redesigned command module in Earth orbit. Then, in a bold move, Apollo 8 took the first humans all the way to the moon. On Christmas Eve of 1968, astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Collins became the first people to orbit the moon, witnessing the breathtaking sight of an Earthrise over the lunar horizon. Their televised broadcast from lunar orbit, where they read from the Book of Genesis, was a moment of profound unity for a world watching back on Earth. Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit, and Apollo 10 was the full dress rehearsal, flying the lunar module down to within 9 miles of the moon's surface before returning to the command module. Everything was ready. The stage was set for the final history-making attempt. On July 16, 1969, the world held its breath as the Saturn V rocket carrying Apollo 11 thundered into the sky. On board were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. 4 days later, on July 20, 1969, Armstrong and Aldrin in their lunar module, named Eagle, began their descent to the lunar surface. The final moments were nerve-wracking. Computer alarms blared, and Armstrong had to take manual control to steer the lander away from a boulder-filled crater with fuel running dangerously low. Then the message came through, clear and historic from over 240,000 miles away. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. A few hours later, Neil Armstrong descended the ladder and became the first human being to step on another world. As he placed his boot onto the fine gray dust, he spoke the immortal words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The world watched, mesmerized. For that one moment, the divisions of the Cold War seemed to melt away. It was a human achievement, not just an American one. The Apollo 11 mission was a resounding success and effectively marked the end of the space race. The United States had fulfilled Kennedy's promise. The Apollo program continued with 5 more successful lunar landings, each one more scientifically ambitious than the last. But with the primary goal achieved, public interest and political will began to fade. The race was won. In the 1970s, the rivalry between the US and USSR began to thaw into a new era of cooperation. The symbolic handshake in space came in 1975 with the Apollo-Soyuz test project, where American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts docked their spacecraft and met in orbit, working together. Looking back, the space race was more than just a competition. It was an incredible catalyst for technological and scientific advancement. It gave us everything from GPS and memory foam to medical imaging and cordless tools. It pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible and inspired a generation to dream, to study science, and to reach for the stars. The race to the moon was a story of rivalry, tragedy, and ultimate triumph, a testament to human ingenuity and our unyielding desire to explore the unknown.